Welcome to another episode of the Agronomy Highlights Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Spellman, and I'm joined here with my co-host and colleague, Justin Brackenridge. Justin, how are you doing in 2025?
I'm doing great. We're looking forward to the start of a new year. We're excited of 2024 was great, but there were a lot of things that we are excited about leaving in 2024 and starting with a clean slate and looking forward to a new year of podcasting. How about you, Ryan? How was your break and your new year?
Oh, my break was wonderful. I was really itching at the bit to get back to podcasting and agronomy, and it just gave me some time to think about all of the things we can do in 2025. I think we learned a lot on this podcast in 2024, and I'm really excited to review some of that today. I think sometimes we move on to the next year too quickly at times, and we don't think back to all of the things we learned in the previous year. So that's
I
exactly
couldn't
what.
agree with you more in like all aspects of life, whether that be agronomy or holidays or any of the things that we do, right? It's we have to take a moment to reflect positively and negatively and think about all of the things that have happened to us and how we can improve upon these experiences, right? We have to take a moment to kind of revel in what's happened and enjoy that, not always thinking about what's exactly next to come. So that's the plan for the day, right? Tell us what we're going to do, Ryan.
That's right. That you're exactly right on that. We can't miss an opportunity to reflect. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna do a little bit of a review of the year. I also have this called a quiz bowl, where we're gonna kind of pose some questions from some previous episodes and see if your lovely, intelligent get hosts here can answer the questions. And then we're gonna play some clips from some previous episodes and hear what the experts that we interviewed throughout the year have to say about those questions. So to start, before we get into kind of the quiz bowl here, um, I just want to pose this to you, Justin. Do you have a favorite episode of this season?
So you asked me this question a few days ago, and I've really been thinking about maybe I have two answers if that's okay, and in a favorite, but also maybe the one that I learned the most from, right? Because everyone knows that listens to this that grass and forages is my favorite topic to things to talk about. So anytime I get the opportunity to talk about hay or alternative forages or any of those types of things, like we did with Dr. Darren Redfern or our summer hay considerations, those type of things, those are always my favorite, right? I really like to do those. But as far as the things that are my favorite, because I do really like learning, has to be about some of the weather, some of the grain marketing, some of these things with the farm successionary planning, right? There's so many things that I don't know that much about. And even organics, right? So maybe I have favorite topics, maybe not specifically favorite episodes,
You just
but
went
there,
through our whole season,
yeah,
didn't
right. Well,
you
there's
just mentioned just about every topic we.
that's okay. I'm allowed to like them all equally, right? They're like my children,
That's
I love
right.
them all for their own reasons in their own rights. But we had such great topics and such great guests that it's been great to learn all of these things. So they're all wonderful to me. What about you?
Oh wow. What a political answer. That's a politician answer right there.
I'm just trying to get everybody to think maybe I skipped one. Maybe I should go back and listen to it because they sound so wonderful.
That's right. No, I agree with you. As I was looking through these episodes, you're right. It's really hard to nail down a favorite. Like you said, I think one thing as we've kind of moved into the 2024 year of this podcast, we really focused on expanding some of the topics that we talk about, and because of that, we had a lot of guests on that shared topics with us that we had no idea, no idea what they were about, and so we learned a lot. And so I am gonna try to pick a favorite here. Okay, I
Make
think,
me
and
look bad.
yeah, that's right. That's my goal. That's why I do the editing. It might be, recency bias a little bit here, but I think back to two of the top episodes were those farm succession planning and grain marketing. I know you mentioned those, but I think those two in a row, season 3, episode 7, and season 3, episode 8, they were totally unfamiliar topics to us. And because of that, I think we learned a lot. And yeah, I remember finishing those episodes and looking at you and saying, wow, I was, we could have went on for 2 hours if we wanted to on that topic. And again, I do, uh, with my background, I really enjoy the organic episodes as well. So, that we did that organic field crop systems with Drew Smith from Rodale, and that one, I really enjoyed that one. If you're into organics, that's kind of a must watch, I'd say. And then the one we just posted last episode, organic no-till and dry beans. That was a really fun episode as well. Um, so yeah, I guess I also just failed to pick a topic in looking through these as well. So maybe we're
So
in the same
something I,
boat.
I don't know that we highlighted maybe as well as we should have, but a really interesting, I think, kind of a favorite to some folks that we maybe talked to, or maybe one of my favorite ones to actually prepare and do the conversations with were these emerging technologies podcasts. So that would have been season 3, episode 2, and episode 3. And I think why that one was so fun for us is a lot of people assume that we know everything that's happening in the research level and all of the grants and all of our specialists. But taking the time to sit down with Dr. Charlie White and Dr. Daniela Corriggio and who else? We had Dr. John Wallace and Dr. Paul Easker.
All right, screw you.
Just getting to visit with those folks and say like, what are you doing? Is such a great opportunity for us that we may not always know, and it gives the listeners a good time to know that the university is actively researching. We're actively trying to work on fixing some problems and getting better at some of these things. And so those are ones that maybe we didn't kind of promote enough, but are ones that I think were very exciting to do.
Yeah, no, you're right, Justin. And actually, those episodes were two of our most downloaded ones as well, believe it or not. So not only are were those exciting ones for us to host, and we got a lot out of hosting those, but I think our listeners really got a lot of those out of those as well. So I think looking into 2025, I think one of our goals could be to put out some more episodes where we bring on those experts in extension and the researchers and do some sort of research update at an annual frequency, biannual frequency. I think those are some really good episodes right there.
All right, so we're going to get started. The way this is going to work is Ryan's kind of picked out some questions and some episodes, and we're going to throw some questions from each of these episodes. We're going to see how well we can answer them. We would encourage you all to play along and see if you've remembered some of the answers to these episodes. Once we go back through them, we're going to do the best we can. Then we're going to play the clip from that explanation. We're going to get it from the expert that gave it to us, and then we're going to talk a little bit about that, and then we're going to jump to the next one, right? So it sounds like a great way to spend the next 30 minutes. Brian, you ready?
No, I'm more than ready.
All
Um,
right.
so let's go with our question number one. And this question I actually pulled, so you're on the hot seat with this one, Justin, because
Yeah, I
this
know.
was one
Yeah.
of the things you said you learned at the end of the episode. So let's see how your content retention is here. So, can you describe the difference between an El Nino and a La Nina?
Maybe not, but what I can do is describe what I said, and it was one of these days, maybe I'll figure it out. I feel like I might be a little closer now than I was. Um,
You're quoting me on that, aren't you?
so that has always been such a big topic in agriculture, right? And AgWeb just put out a little bit of a clip this week. Excuse me, not this week, but a week or two ago in December about this formation of the La Nina starting and the signals. But really, what we're looking at is this surface temperature of the water in the equatorial Pacific, and that's about as far as I can take that. And that sounds very superficial. What we see is when the water's warmer, we're in the El Nino, and when the water's cooler, we're in the La Nina. I think that our expert can probably explain it a little better than that, but I
Yeah,
do know that those are like textbook definitions to what's happening there.
so you said El Nino is when it's warmer.
Correct. Yep.
Yep. So El Nino, and that's what if I remember correctly, I think the El Nino is when your water temperature is warmer, and it's the surface temperature, I
Yes.
think specifically in the Pacific equatorial waters. Now, and that's my guess, but we are gonna see here what our expert, and this is from our season 3, episode 6. How to Predict the Weather with Kyle Imhoff.
And if we weren't going to talk about it yet, it would come up El Nino and La Nina, right? So this is whenever we look into the crystal ball into, let's say, more than a couple of weeks out. That's we go back to these kind of global scale features that impact the weather. So for those of you listening that aren't familiar with El Nino and La Nina, it's basically just the temperature of sea surface temperatures over the equatorial Pacific. So sea surface temperatures in that
I
central
told
Pacific
you.
region that's either along the equator or just to the north or south of the equator. And basically when it gets really warm, when those waters get really warm in that region, it can impact, it's a large enough impact that it can have downstream effects that certainly impact much of North America, but it can actually have a global signal that shows up across everywhere in the world that has some influence from a weather perspective, whether it's temperature or precipitation. And then La Nina, so El Nino is when it's warmer than average in that region. La Nina is the opposite, when you have a cold signal or colder than normal waters over that equatorial Pacific region.
All right, there you go. So I was incorrect to think I could thwart you on that one. You've done your homework, Justin. So I think Kyle did a great job of describing that. Justin, you look like you have something to say here. Maybe you want
Well,
to hold
no,
on to
I was gonna.
your
I
victory.
cheated. I cheated a little because this has been something that's been coming up in the news recently, right? Of this formation of the La Nina and the weak signals coming in from that, and the signals of the La Nina leaving. And this is a really important conversation for us in agriculture and how it affects temperature and weather and drought. Um, but it's really complicated, right? I don't think that this clip or maybe even a podcast or something like this can really fully grasp the terms that they use as far as signals and remnants of signals and the change that can occur. But one note that they're making right now is that as this La Nina comes in and we see these cooler temperatures, that can lead to drier conditions. And so that's kind of the interesting point that we're at right now is how is this going to look? And they're kind of looking at November to January. Is what will this look like? Kind of moving through these very cool La Nina conditions as our weather moves into the growing season. So I think if you didn't listen to this episode, it may be something to go back and refresh yourself to, kind of thinking about weather and our patterns changing.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. This is a great time to listen to that episode because we recorded that episode in the fall and we were specifically talking about fall weather but also predicting the winter weather. And so now that we're in the winter season and can see some of the results of those broader patterns, I think it would be really helpful for our listeners to go back and re-listen to that episode and Kyle did a great job of really describing how our weather patterns work and what drives different weather throughout the season. I think that was a really interesting episode and one that is especially this time of year really quite relevant.
So another one, right? This was kind of before Ryan and I took over, but if you went back to season 1, episode 16, we have another episode called "What's Up with the Weather," and that was with Eric Snodgrass from Nutrient Ag Solutions. And this is a pretty good, interesting topic where they get into some of this as well, and they actually discuss some of the options you have for forecasting the weather, right? What models work best and what apps or what web pages and stuff. And so that's kind of an interesting conversation, but kind of check into both of those. That would be episode 1, or excuse me, season 1, episode 16, What's Up with the Weather, or season 3, episode 6, How to Predict the Weather, fall weather update.
There you go. Yeah, it's great. It's a good reminder that we have a lot of episodes archived. So we can speak to a lot of the episodes since we've taken over here. But if you're looking, especially as we get into winter break, if you're looking to kill some time and look back at some of our older episodes, there's a lot of great content in there.
So,
All right.
Ryan, I'm going to send this next question to you because
All
you
right, let's
mentioned it
see.
as one of your favorites. Can you define what is basis price and grain marketing and how is it calculated?
All right, that's right. And it was one of my favorites because I don't know a lot about grain marketing. And it's one of those things you do the episode and you finish and you're like, wow, I've really learned a lot. And then when you think back to what you retained, it's like you never listened. So here is what I remember. Okay, so the when we're talking about the basis price, there are a few other terms that we need to define here. There's the cash price, which is the price of grain when you go to your grain buyer, the day you show up, as I understand it here. And then there's the futures price. And now the futures price is where I get a little bit foggy. I know the futures is kind of uh, usually a term when we're talking about a grain contract. You may accept to sell your grain at a future price where they predict the grain price will be at a certain time. And so the basis is the difference between your futures and your cash. Now, how is that important? That's probably important when we're looking at grain buying contracts. So I guess that's a long way of saying the basis price is the difference between the futures and the cash price. I'm going to lock in that answer. Should we see what our experts have to say?
I think that sounds like a really good answer, but let's hear what John had to say about that.
All right, let's see. All right, John, tell us what you have to say.
Yeah, basis. Uh, Really, there's a couple different ways to approach thinking about basis. From a fundamental math equation type way of looking at it, basis is we've got three values you're looking at. There's the cash price that we actually get for the grain that we sell, and then there's this futures price from the futures market. And we'll talk about that one here in a moment, and then there's this value in between called basis that really you're subtracting uh, basis from that futures price to get to that net cash price you're going to receive for the grain. So it's the difference between cash and futures is one way to look at it. A better way I think to understand basis is because ultimately the question is, well, how do they calculate basis? Where does this number come from? And really, it's essentially your local supply and demand value. And every different elevator, grain elevator that you could possibly sell to has their own basis number. It essentially accounts for their costs because once they buy that grain from you, they got to manage it, handle it. They've got to maybe uh, deliver it, transport it somewhere if they're not necessarily the end user, but they're maybe kind of one of those middle people involved in the long term process where they're buying it to turn around and resell. And so they have some costs involved. Maybe there's some operating interest that they're paying on that those kind of get thrown into that basis number. The other portion of basis that kind of goes into that number is their demand for essentially your supply or to the area supply of grain. And so you'll see that number kind of get if there's the difference between cash and futures gets a little bit wider where that basis is a little bit larger of a number, and we usually see this as a negative number. If that negative number gets more negative or wider, we call that a weak basis because you're getting pushed to take less money on the cash side.
All right, I think we can close that off there. I think there you go. I got half of the answer, I guess.
So I think you got the answer, right? What I prefer to work with is it's your local demand for grain, right?
Yeah.
I don't know that that helps us understand how it's calculated. I don't know that that helps us understand where it comes from. But I think conceptually, and if we're sitting at our computer looking at three or four different markets or mills that we can sell at, and we know that this one's got a strong or a weak because it's plus 10, minus 40, I think we can interpret to that this one needs it more than that one, and therefore we're going to get a better price.
Yeah, that's right. I think the book value and how that number is actually used are two very different things. And one thing that I really enjoyed about this episode, and you kind of got an idea for that in that second part of that clip right there, is John. He really dove into what these numbers actually look like when it comes to your relationship with that grain buyer, right? And he brought in the cost of production, how that impacts your basis, how that impacts the demand, and how that can differ between different places. So I thought for anyone interested in how grain buying works and how the prices get decided, that was just a wealth of information in that area. So yeah, that clip again, that came from season 3, episode 7, grain marketing bases with John Laporte, and he was a specialist from Michigan State Extension. So if you're interested, look into that episode. It was a great one. All right, on to our next question. This one, oh, this one's a perfect one for you, Justin. So you might get to cheat here. We'll go easy on you with this one. Hopefully, unless you get it wrong, then you'll really look bad. I'm just trying to put the pressure on.
Yeah, right. Now it's really built up. Okay.
Yeah. I'm just trying to really build this up for you. So this is a question that comes out of season 2, episode 2, summer annual forages with Dr. Darren Redfern out of University of Nebraska. So in this episode, we talked all about summer annual forages, all kinds. Talked about different traits, how to use them. And so here's a question I have from that episode. What kind of summer annual would be best used for silage?
What a great question, and what a great episode. Dr. Redfern was probably one of my favorite guests. He was just such an interesting guy and had such great personality and such a great love for forages, which I can appreciate. But thinking about what would be the best one for silage, and I don't know, maybe I'm not remembering as well as I did because that would have been 8 months ago, 7 months ago.
It is kind
Traditionally,
of a niche question from that episode.
yeah, right. So I'm hoping I'm not remembering my knowledge and I'm remembering his, but I think that the answer to this is going to be things like our traditional forage sorghum and things like sorghum Sudan grass are going to be our best options when it comes to actually like chopping and ensiling some of these summer annuals. And then I think he kind of continued talking and gave some information that I didn't know about how some of these traits get stacked within some of these like sorghum Sudan hybrids, and you have things that they consider like a juicy or a wet stem compared to a drier stem, and how you can talk to your seed person and figure out if it's something that you would prefer it be like a baleage to where you might want it a little drier or something that that would work better. You want something on the drier stem side of things compared to that silage. You may look for something with that juicy or wetter stem. So I'm gonna lock in forage sorghum and or sorghum Sudan grass.
All right, well, let's roll the clip and see if you're right. So I think I misspoke when I introduced this. This is season 2, episode 20, not episode 2.
Summer annuals are better for grazing. I would argue that forage sorghum or cane or the tall stuff that we manage with a single harvest is probably much more valuable as silage. It'd be awfully difficult to make into dry hay, and then it's just impractical to try to graze that. Sudan grass on the opposite end of the spectrum, it's fine stemmed, very quick growing, much more suited for grazing or hay, has a low sugar concentration. So while you could make silage out of it, that would be like trying to make hay out of a forage sorghum. It would just be impractical. These sorghum Sudan grasses, on the other hand, those are the ones that have the most flexibility. Also, the hardest to choose a variety of those. But if you're unsure whether you want to graze it, hay, or make silage out of it, then probably a sorghum Sudan grass might be a better option.
Well, Justin, I think you did a pretty good job there. It sounds like you did your homework on this one. So he mentioned sorghum Sudan, or sorry, forage sorghum, which you did say forage sorghum. The one you missed there is cane. Now, I don't actually remember talking a lot about cane in that episode, but that was one of them. And then he did mention now sorghum Sudan grass. He didn't really mention that one was good for silage. He said he would rather graze that, if I listened correctly there.
So I think so my understanding and kind of some knowledge that I have and some things of this is sorghum Sudan is going to give us that best flexibility. And he mentioned that, and I think that's a great thing to say, is when we think about the spectrums of where he talked about forage sorghum, or if we just take it as sorghum, that's going to be kind of this very juicy, very starchy, very sugary kind of plant. And if we look at the other end of the spectrum, we have the Sudan grass, again, just what he mentioned. And then we take the middle road of those, sorghum and Sudan grass, we get sorghum Sudan grass, right? This kind of hybrid
Sure.
between them. And so that's where that's coming from. And it makes very practical, very common knowledge sense that like these things would fit right between the two of them as their end uses.
Yeah, and I think
I'm giving it to myself as a win.
no, I think you got that one. I'm trying to nitpick here, and we did talk a lot in this episode about, as you're mentioning, this spectrum of sorghum to Sudan grass, right? All of the traits that are available and can be leveraged for these different end uses. And one thing he mentioned in this clip, that not only it's also about the growth pattern, right? The longer stuff is going to be hard to graze, so it could be used very easily as silage. So yeah, that was a really great episode, and I think summer annual forages is really something that a lot of Pennsylvania grazers and beef operations and even dairies could use a lot more of. So yeah, that was a good episode.
So I think this one might be a bit of a shot for you. So I'm hoping you maybe did some homework here.
All right, let's see.
So this one is coming from season 3, episode 4, where we talked with the forage system specialist Joe Lawrence of the Cornell Pro Dairy team. And our focus on this episode was corn silage management and the lessons we learned from 2024. So if you listen to this one, or even if you haven't, right, it was a very we took this kind of starting out of what is silage, how do we make good silage, how do we use silage, and how was this dry year impactful on silage? My question for you, Ryan, how long does it take to ferment and make good silage? And what are the major phases of the ensiling process? You can take them in any order you want.
All right.
I'm happy to listen.
Let's see. Okay, so how long does silage take? And this might be pulling from my own experience again here, rather than actually what the episode said. But I always think 2 months. 2 months is how long it takes to make good silage, and so if we're thinking 2 months, that would be 60 days. So I'm going to say 60 days, and maybe I could imagine if you do a really good job, if you hit everything right, you get the particle size proper, you pack it in real well, might be able to go even a little bit earlier than 60 days, but I think 60 is probably a good number here. um and what was the other question? What are the major, like, the process of ensiling?
What are the stages of the ensiling process? Yep.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Yeah, so I think so let's think. So first you harvest the material you're going to ensile, you chop it, okay? And then you bring it, a lot of times in Pennsylvania at least, we're bringing it to a bunker, at least in my area, and you're packing it in, and the purpose of packing is to get as much oxygen out of that siling product as possible. And part of that is to culture the right microbes, and that would be anaerobic. Oh, what is it? Anaerobic, maybe microbes in general, whether that's bacteria or fungi. I think a little bit of both. So there you go. That's the major process at play. That's what I'm gonna lock in there.
So let's hear what Joe has to say about this. But I think you're getting really close.
Yeah. Right. And the 45 days is if it's really truly been an efficient fermentation. So yeah, there's multiple phases. Our first goal is to push all the oxygen out of it, because there are some aerobic bacteria in there that will continue to consume carbohydrates, or the feed, if there's still oxygen. That's essentially composting, right? We turn compost to introduce oxygen to keep those aerobic bacteria breaking down the material. Well, we don't want that to happen with our silage, so we want to push all the oxygen out, get past that aerobic phase into that anaerobic phase, as you mentioned, Justin, and then we that's where we see those bacteria, in essence, that over time they kind of pickle themselves, so they feed off the sugars, the energy, and the silage, and byproducts of that are acids that lower the pH. So eventually, first you run out of oxygen, you turn anaerobic, and then you have those anaerobic bacteria that are producing acids as a byproduct, and lowering the pH on themselves to the point where they can no longer survive, and that at which point you have a stable feed.
All right, well, there we go. That's I guess I didn't quite get the. I think. What do you think? Did I win on that one?
I think you're really close. Yeah, I think you've got a lot of the parts there. I don't know if we can, but I would hit play and run a little bit more of that one.
Sure.
And that's where, right, to get to, again, if it goes very efficiently, that 45 days, 60 days out, hopefully you've reached that point of stable feed, where there's no more activity going on there, and there won't be until oxygen is introduced again. And just to tie that back into the corn silage, so even after it reaches that stable phase, we continue to see an improvement in starch digestibility out for several months. So our guidelines for corn silage are, ideally you would wait 3 to 4 months to start feeding that.
There you go. I'm glad you made me continue that clip, because at first he had me on the 45 days, but then in that second part he said 45 to 60. So
I think that's the interesting question, right? Is how long does it take to make silage? How long does it take to make good silage? And I'll be honest, you get on the internet and you Google how long does it take to make silage, you're going to find a lot of information that says about 21 days. And so there becomes this question, but I think the really interesting part of what he says on this length is it should be stable in this stable phase, right? You've dropped your pH. Until you introduce oxygen, you shouldn't see a lot of problems. Somewhere about that 45 to 60. But research shows that as you continue to go out into this like 3 to 4 month, you're going to continue to increase your starch digestibility and your feed value. Usually about that 4 month mark, he mentions that it kind of doesn't get much better than that. And so now we're pushing in that 120 days. So the longer we can keep this stuff kind of sealed off and keep it in that stable phase, the better. So I thought that was really great information and stuff that maybe a lot of us wouldn't recognize when talking about silage.
yeah, definitely, right. That's and one thing that we did talk about in this episode is what's the difference between that quantity and quality curve, right? Is it better to wait and have a higher quality silage, and you can feed less of it, and again, getting to that point where it's stable, where you've undergone many of those sugars have been digested as possible, you've lowered the pH to a place where those anaerobic microbes can no longer survive. I think he did a great job of explaining how that works in a biological sense. So, yep, agreed. And that is we in that episode. Not only did we cover the basics of silage biology, but we talked all about how the environment affects silage, how different traits affect silage. We really covered the gamut of silage in that episode. So go give it a listen. That's season 3, episode 4. All right, so it looks like the next one will be for you then. So let me pull this up. All right, this is from one of your favorite episodes here, and that was our farm succession planning episode. That's season 3, episode 8, with Joy Kirkpatrick and Darlene Livingston. So I guess this is another two-parter for you. Or no, this is just a one-parter. Never mind. We have another question from this episode that we can pitch after. But what is the difference between transition planning and farm succession planning?
Yeah, and so this is one of the I know this one very, very well. So Maybe I
This was
should just say
another
it.
one at the end that we tested you at the end of the episode. This is
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
outtake.
And
Your
I felt like this was one of the more impactful statements that we kind of made in all of the podcasts that we've done, because I get asked this question so much. Sometimes this transition or secession gets used as like synonyms. Um, the transition is this tangible objects, right? And they talked about this as the land, the machinery, the livestock. It can be changed with a document, a single document with a single signature. The secessionary is the business and the management and the day-to-day activities and the things that continue to make something viable. This is not necessarily always tangible, but this skill and this knowledge and this knowing and what is so important to these businesses. Now, maybe I got it wrong, but I don't think. But let's hear what they have to say on the topic.
all right, yeah, I think you're pretty close there. Let's see.
I want to jump right into this, right? We've done some introduction, we've done some discussion. My first question is there a difference between successionary planning and transition planning? I hear both of these terms thrown around when I go to meetings. Is what's the difference here? Is this the same thing?
I think they are used, those words are used interchangeably. I do like to draw a tad bit of a distinction between the two of them. I think that transition planning is more, in my mind, about the tangible assets, right? The land, um, the machinery, the livestock, those kinds of things. So like the things that you can like physically transition and you're using. When I talk about, and that can happen within and that can happen as the business continues. It could happen at an estate planning point, right? Like after the owners have passed away. So I think that's the way I look at the phrase transition planning. When I talk about succession planning, I wrap in also the idea that there is management that needs to be transferred, that decision-making piece needs to be developed, and that it's an actual business that's going to still be running, because transitioning, that can mean that it gets divvied up to a lot of different people, or it could mean that it goes all together. But succession planning, I think, is a bit more specific to the business continuing in some sort of fashion.
There you go. I think you hit the nail on the head on that one. I think you did your homework again. Good work, Justin.
No, I promise I'm not cheating, but I will say I think of the hours of podcasting we have done, to me that was there's a personal interest in that. That was a very personal, powerful podcast, right? This is a very emotional thing for a lot of people that we work with. This is a very important topic, and I think this one was very, very good for resources and helping to understand and making me feel better equipped to get out there and have these conversations. So yeah, I really enjoyed that one. So maybe it was a little bit cheating because it was kind of one of my favorites and one of the ones I learned a lot from.
No,
But
I
speaking
agree.
of,
I mean, we I remember after recording this, we told our whole team of extension educators, "Hey, if you guys listen to any, you should really listen to this because we're all working with farmers all the time, and all of them are in that secession process or looking at that secession process. So to understand this process and the resources are available, incredibly important. And one of the resources that they mentioned in this episode was a manual, so farm secession check. What did they call it? A checkbook or I don't know. Well, anyways, listen to the episode. There is a wonderful resource that they mentioned. It's some sort of manual that you can work through. It's a workbook. That's what it is. The Farm Succession Planning Workbook that both Darlene and Joy had worked on putting together. And basically, it walks families through all of the types of things that they need to consider as they're doing this transition process. So that's one of those those wonderful resources that came out of that episode. All right, I think our actually next question is on this one as this episode as well.
yeah, so you're right. The next question does come from this. And when we were doing this, there was a lot of mention of these three financial buckets in a farm operation. Ryan, do you know or remember what the three buckets were? And perhaps if you don't know all three, maybe you remember one or two of the financial buckets.
Yeah, that's right. I'm thinking I might have two of these. So if I remember what these financial buckets are, anyway, it's what farmers or farm operations should be putting their funds, their assets into three different categories. And then in succession planning, figuring out how to best transition those buckets, or maybe you don't. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about this. And the 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 two buckets that I can remember are your retirement. I remember we really stressed the importance of making sure that you're putting funds away and assets away towards retirement. And then the other one are the business assets themselves. So all of the assets that the business owns, and oftentimes these are the assets that are going to be um, transition or succeeded to the next owners. So I can't remember the third one. Do you remember the third one, Justin?
Unfortunately, the question wasn't directed at me, Ryan.
Oh
No,
man.
I don't. You did better with those than I would have. I was actually scrambling trying to think in case you did ask me, but I don't know the answers to these. So let's have Darlene and Joy remind us and tell us what these three buckets
That's
are.
right. That's right. We'll have the experts tell us.
Good question. So we've got that one
Look at that. Someone had a great question.
bucket. That's that retirement. And I always joke that, retirement's a four-letter word to farmers, right? So sometimes they say, well, shifting gears to your later farming years is, we'll call it that. And then that next bucket, that second bucket, is that if you do have a successor that's interested or maybe even been a part of the farm for several years, you've kind of made maybe a promise that, or some sort of maybe even unspoken idea that those assets are going to be in place in some sort of way for that next generation to be able to farm. So you're looking at those assets being income stream of some sort for that next generation. And if that's just to like pay for just those farming, we in Wisconsin, at least, a lot of farms are having to have off farm income, right? So that can help with it. But the second bucket is those business assets there for that next generation, if that's the plan. And then, depending on the size of your family, that successor may not be related to you. So we also have this third bucket a lot of times that we have to talk about, and that's the inheritance assets. So whether your successor is related to you or not, you might have children who you want to, in some way, provide some sort of inheritance. I'm very careful about saying that those off-farm children have an expectation of inheritance, because maybe we need to tamper down some expectations, right, with the size of the farm and what that owner generation's goals are. We always want to go back and say, what does the owner generation want that end result to be, right?
There we go. So inheritance assets are the ones that I missed there. But you did say or name one or two. So
No, I think that's a great, perfect answer for you.
yeah, so there we go. So our three buckets are our business assets, our inheritance assets, and now retirement assets. I almost forgot the one that we started with. So again, check that episode out. All right, should we keep it moving on here? All right, so moving on here. The next question is going to be um, from our emerging technology episode at the beginning of the season. So this was a season 3, episode 2, and this is our part 1 of the series. And specifically, I'm going to narrow this down for you to make it as easy as possible.
Please do.
Because you've been throwing easy ones at me, right?
Yeah, right.
So this one was with Dr. Paul Easker, and he is our pathologist, our plant pathologist on our Penn State Extension team. And we were talking about drones specifically in this episode. And so my question to you is, what is one of the major limitations or open questions for the efficacy of fungicide application by drone?
So this one's probably making you cringe that you don't get to answer this question, right? If you
Oh
don't
yeah,
remember,
I
Ryan's a
have this.
pathologist by training. So
And
he's
not
probably
only
got
that, but I also worked in Dr. Paul Easker's lab for a while.
So he's
So
probably got 10 of the major limitations, where I'm going to scramble for one of them, right? If we had flip-flopped maybe this one in the small grain. Anyway,
but that
so
wouldn't be any fun.
yeah, right. So I think I'm going to go with proper coverage, right? I think if I recall back, I think that might have been one of the questions with like some turbulence off of the drones and the props, and how we get that out compared to what we're used to with booms, and kind of focusing on small grains and the timing and having to get them into the flowers versus perhaps just on the leaf of some of our other things. How do we get this coverage that we actually need to make fungicides specifically work well in some of these applications?
All right, cool. So coverage. Let's see. Let's see what Paul has to say.
Nervous.
From a disease perspective, if we start with small grains, our primary focus in Pennsylvania here in the east would be something along the lines of fusarium, head scab, or blight. And so there we know, it's one thing if we're looking at the foliar disease complex, it's another when we're trying to protect the head. We need to get that product where the flowers are. We know how to do it when we're running across with a spray boom on a tractor mount, or if we're running it in plot, we can adjust to that. But trying to mimic that with the drone when you have a lot of turbulent energy, how well are we depositing the product where it needs to be? And how do we measure that? And actually, this has become the most common question across all of them. How do you measure efficacy using spray cards or other things? Because they don't necessarily mimic the plant organ or what we're trying to protect. And so long conversations about that. If I switch to corn and I'm thinking of what I need to protect in corn, I'm looking at my ear leaf area. So the timing of most sprays around tasseling into R1 brown silk, those ranges, you've got to drive that product down. We've taken video from our backpack. We have these telescoping booms that allow us to mimic a ground rig. I can see the almost like a rain coming down into the canopy, getting down to where I need it to go as we go through that. With the drone, we have a lot of energy. You've probably seen a lot of videos where corn stalks are moving all over the place. Same sort of question. Are we driving it down to where we need to? And how do you mimic protecting the ear leaf? Again, how do you measure that? It's not so straightforward.
There you go. You had no reason to be nervous there. You need to give yourself a pat on the back. I think you did a great job. Coverage you mentioned. You mentioned turbulence. He talked about turbulence there. So I think
If
you
I
did.
got a point for matching every word he said, I think I might have had 2 or 3 points.
That's
Yeah,
right.
I think I got lucky.
And you only said like 2 or 3 words, so that's like
Yeah, no, I'm
out of
going to
2 or
take that
3.
as a good win. No, that's
Yeah.
a really neat one, right? And we're seeing a lot of interest in drones and a lot of the different things that we've got out there. Specifically, I see it a lot because people thinking about tar spots and applications in corn. We focused a lot with Dr. Paul on this about fungicides, but there's also interest in things like burr cucumber and some of these spot sprays when we get kind of late season and stuff like corn too. So if you have an interest in any of this like drone or precision spray technology, I would really encourage you to check out this one. This is season 3, episode 2, with Dr. John Wallace, who did some exact spray herbicide applications, and Dr. Paul Easker's work with the drone and fungicides, what we know and what we're working on doing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that episode in particular, there were a lot of those kind of discussions about what are a lot of the questions, the open questions of these technologies, and what do we need to do a lot more research on, and what research is currently going on in the lab. So I think if you're looking for some real information about the current knowledge base on these technologies, that is a great place to look. All right. Well, I think you're up for posing the question.
Yeah, so I remember this one pretty well because so this comes from season 3, episode 10, organic no-till dry beans, with Kristen Loria. She's an extension specialist at Cornell, and Kristen kept using the scientific name for dry beans, and I had taken this note over here on the side of my paper of what this was. And then when I put it in Google, Google had no idea. My spelling for this was so terrible that it couldn't even help me kind of suss out what this answer was going to be. So the question for the day is now on Ryan. What is the scientific name for dry beans, and how might you go about spelling that?
Oh wow. Well, so I'm glad in that episode you brought up look that up, and it's not spelled the way you think it is, because I did the same thing. I plugged in what I thought it sounded like, and I couldn't find it. So I just ended up looking at, scientific name of dry beans.
And I think it's
So
perfectly acceptable for us to both save face and not try to say or spell this if we don't want to. And you can try, but I
I
would
think I
not.
can. Okay. So I think I'm remembering the name, which is Phaseolus or Phaseolus vulgaris is what I think it is. How to spell that? Let's see. We'll sound it out. So
Well, I can tell you phaseolus does not start with an F.
No, it doesn't, and I typed in the same thing, so I'm with you on that one. And that's the only reason I know it's PH. So Phaseolus. Oh, he's giving me a thumbs up. So Vulgaris, Vulgaris.
Man, that's incredible.
Did I
Good
get
for
it?
you. I think that should be like ending on a high note. What a great start to the year. But let's hear
I think
Kristen
so.
tell us a little bit more about these dry beans.
Yeah, because I don't know the second part of that question, which is what is it in its mature stage? I don't remember that, so I didn't have to say that. Keep going.
Yeah, I think we're gonna find that there's something the difference between a pulse and a dry bean.
Oh, or is a pulse the? Well, let's just see. Let's see.
So when we say dry bean, we are really referring to what's known as edible bean. And so it's Phaseolus vulgaris, also known as common bean. So it's the same species that would give you a snap bean or a green bean, but it really is produced more like a soybean. So you're taking that crop to full maturity and we're eating that seed, as a pulse crop is another word for it. So pulses include chickpeas, lentils, dry peas, as well as dry beans. So it is a little bit confusing that it's the same crop species, but it's essentially, the same as soybean and edamame, right? We eat it at the fresh stage as a vegetable, and we eat it at the mature stage as sort of a staple pulse crop. And so all of our all of the dry beans that we grow here in the East are common bean, are that same species. So that can include.
That's probably.
But I think collectively, I mean, you did most of the heavy lifting, but I think between the two of us, we really got 95% of that right.
Yeah. And again, if we go back to just mentioning the right words, I mean, you mentioned pulse crop before we went on.
Yeah.
And so as we can hear Kristen Loria explain it, the pulse crop is just another word for a bean or maybe a leguminous plant that's harvested at the dry bean stage rather than as a vegetable. And the best part is she didn't actually spell the species name, so we don't have to fact check it.
Yeah, that was another really interesting episode. I mean, that's one of the things that we kind of don't get into a whole lot, right? Because we're technically kind of somewhere between that agronomy horticultural line when we think about dry beans versus snap beans and stuff, right? And so that's kind of an interesting concept or an interesting spot for us between this. And so it was really neat to have her on and learn more about this. And I was just kind of amazed at how many different beans I'll say are lumped into this common bean umbrella, and what a breath that kind of took in of all of these different things are technically in the dry bean column.
Yeah, definitely. It's it's cool because, like you said, this is kind of at the verge of that horticulture agronomy line, and I think in this episode we talked a little bit about how kind of strange that is, right? That we like to separate ourselves, but we grow soybeans, and I think for a lot of our growers that are looking for alternatives and something to include in their rotation, and we talked about how this fits into organic operations where diversity is really important, right? This could fit really neatly into some of our rotations we already have in Pennsylvania. So I think that's a cool episode, especially for someone looking for something new to add to their field cropping rotation. And we also did a conversation, a discussion in the beginning of that episode just about managing an organic reduced tillage system. So that was a really cool episode. And again, a topic that I hold close to my heart in the organic world. Yeah.
But I think that is a great spot to stop on a high note, right? Of getting this dry bean. You got the name right, you got the spelling right.
That's
I
right.
think this is an excellent jumping off point for this kind of year in review. There were so many excellent episodes, so many wonderful guests. I feel like this has been a success for us, and we really just can't thank the folks that kind of give us ideas and that come on and join us enough. We're really looking forward to taking this on some more in 2025. We've got some great ideas and some great guests already kind of in the works and lined up to move forward. But please, continue to check out any of these older episodes or any of these things. The archives is there, and just because it might have a little age on it doesn't mean it's not relevant anymore.
Yeah, that's right. I think it was really fun to review our 2024 year. I really enjoyed this, and it makes me really excited to come up with some new ideas for 2025 and really reflect on all the folks that work to make this all happen. I think you mentioned all the folks that are giving us good ideas to work off of for the episodes. Keep reaching out to us, keep sharing ideas with us. The guests that come on, we couldn't host this show as we're sitting here pulling some quotes from experts, right? We get to sit on this show every other week and talk to experts in their field, and it's a really cool thing we get to do, and I'm really happy we get to share this with you all. And then our listeners, thank you all for making this happen. So thank you guys all for a wonderful 2024 season. And I think that's probably the best way we can close out this show and keep sharing ideas for the 2025 year. We're really looking forward to it.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say is we know that in 2 weeks we'll be joined by Dave Hartman, and
right.
in his position on the Pennsylvania Grazing Land Association. We're going to do a little bit different episode for us, but it's going to focus on livestock management and how we can graze pastures during the winter and how we can kind of keep some of the muck and the mud and some of that destruction down. So if you enjoyed what you heard here, please join us in 2 weeks, and we look forward to visiting with you then.
That's right. Thank you guys for listening and making it all the way to the end here. And we'll see you again on another New Year episode of the Agronomy Highlights Podcast.